Hey, this is Jamey from Stonemaier Games, as you can tell from my t-shirt here. This video is going to be a little different because one of the things that I love about the board game industry is that new people discover tabletop games every day. I don't know how many people exactly, but I think people are constantly discovering tabletop games. And sometimes we forget that, especially if you've been in the industry or the hobby for a long time. You're so entrenched in it that you may not realize it. And I do the same thing. But as someone who owns a board game company and who designs games, I thought I'd take this idea that I'm thinking of right now, that people are discovering the tabletop hobby and my company and my games every day. I thought I'd film a video that talks about the history of Stonemaier Games. So whether or not you are new to the hobby or you're new to Stonemaier Games, or if you think you know a lot about my company, this video might be interesting to you because I'm going to talk about kind of the evolution of my company over time. Hopefully I'll do it succinctly. I'll kind of go year by year, and hopefully you'll learn something new about Stonemaier Games. So I'll start before 2011. So everything before 2011, I'll wrap up by saying a few different things. One is I grew up, fortunately, in a family that played a lot of tabletop games, and so I was playing games from a pretty young age. And I also, as soon as I got into games from maybe 8 or 9 years old, I was also interested in designing games. So I've been pretty much designing games my whole life, mostly as a hobby up until my adult life. But and I never thought much of anything would come of it, but I still really enjoyed doing it for fun as a kid. As I got older, I also found a passion for entrepreneurship. And so I went to school. I have a degree in international business from Washington University in St. Louis, also a minor in Japanese, because I thought I was going to do like Japanese international business in Japan, something like that. But I have a business degree. I worked as a waiter, and I'm going to mention a few jobs here because it pertains to how I now run my company. So I worked as a waiter, so I learned a lot about customer service. I worked as a project manager at a medical textbook publishing company after college. So I learned a lot about project management and managing different facets of a project as you do as a project manager. And I worked as a director of operations at a facility at WashU where I learned a little bit about operating a facility, which I don't really use now, but I also learned about operating people, managing people, and also importantly managing volunteers, which ended up being really important to me, and also a little bit about fundraising because it was a nonprofit. I did start 2 businesses before Stonemaier Games. One was called Type Tribe, which went nowhere. It was basically a very small company. I had an idea. I raised a little bit of money from friends and family. It didn't go anywhere. And I also started a local fiction book publishing company called Blank Slate Press. I helped to found it. I think it has a different name now because I ended up giving back my shares in this company. It was something that was fun for a few years. I ended up moving on to focus on other things, and in particular, Stonemaier Games. So that's everything before 2011. Let's jump to 2011, which was the year that I really became fascinated with Kickstarter. And I've been interested in Kickstarter for a while, but 2011 it really clicked with me because I started to see board game projects show up on Kickstarter. And I was fascinated by that because I had this hobby of designing board games and this passion for entrepreneurship, but I really also liked the people side of entrepreneurship. Specifically, and this is how it relates to Kickstarter. I loved that you could actually know who your customers are and have a direct connection with your customers through Kickstarter. And that in some ways they became more than just customers. They became a community. They became people that you know, faces and names that you know and that you could connect to and could help you build something better than you could alone. So I just became fascinated with this idea of putting a board game on Kickstarter. And so I started to design a game with the intent of doing so. There are actually a few different games that happened that I brainstormed and designed a little bit of, but viticulture became that main game. I have a pile of games next to me that I will show you. I'll show you all the games that my company has published so far. I'll get to them as they actually reach fruition, as they become created. Because right now, viticulture was just an idea, and it was just me working on it, playtesting with friends. And one of those playtests was with my friend Alan and his wife. I think it was just Alan and his wife. And Alan contacted me after the playtest and said, I really had a good time doing that. I had a good time playing it, giving you feedback. What if I were more involved in this venture? And I thought that was really cool. I thought, that's what I need. I like working alone. I run Stonemaier Games largely alone. But it was really helpful to have a partner and a business partner who could encourage me, who could challenge me, who could hold me accountable, and who could be there early on, especially as a playtester, when I started to feel bad about asking all my friends to playtest this game with me. So it was nice to have someone that I could just rely on to playtest the game. We were just in it for the fun. We weren't paying ourselves. I'll mention a certain point in time where we started to make a little bit of money, where we started to pay ourselves a little bit, but that did not happen for several years. And that was not at this point in late 2011. So let's go to 2012. That's it for 2011. So I was designing a game. 2012, I continued to design Viticulture, ended up putting it on Kickstarter. And before Kickstarter, Alan and I both invested, I think it was $800. It was $600 or $800, somewhere around there, a very small amount of money just to cover some of the art to make the game possible. We also had another investor at the time who I ended up buying their shares fairly early on in the growth of my company, of our company. But early on, it was a very small investment. I want to mention that number because it becomes a very different number later on in the growth of the company. But very small investment early on. We launched on Kickstarter. It took, I believe, about 2 weeks for it to fund, which is like forever in today's terms. But back then, there weren't many game projects on Kickstarter, and it was a wonderful feat just to fund. I honestly didn't know if that would happen, and I didn't consider us even having a company until that did happen. But we did fund on Kickstarter, funded Viticulture on Kickstarter. I was kind of running the show. I was working my full-time job. I was also running the Kickstarter as a full-time job. And we ended up raising about $65,000 over the course of this Viticulture Kickstarter campaign, which was amazing. There were also some very close calls early on. Like I said, I don't want to get too detailed in anything, but I think this is relevant because there were two things that could have sunk my company very early on. One was a stretch goal for metal coins that if we had reached that goal, we definitely wouldn't have had the money to make them, and I would have had to dip way deep into my savings. It might have been very treacherous for my company if I had done that, or I may have had to go back on a promise to meet that stretch goal. So I'm glad that usually I'm happy when I reach stretch goals, or when anyone does. I'm glad that we didn't reach that one. Metal coins I don't think are good for a stretch goal. They're better for an add-on or a built-in element to a deluxe game because they're so expensive. The other thing is I kind of had this flat rate for worldwide shipping, and which I thought was a good idea at the time. And at the time, pretty much every project was shipped almost by hand, really. Like this was back in 2012. People were funding games and then sending them to their garage or maybe their warehouse if they had a very small company, and they would ship them themselves by hand to everyone around the world from that one location. And so I kind of had that idea in mind as well, and that I would ship everything and that I would take a small loss on international games. But my math really wasn't very good, and if I hadn't found a better solution, that also probably could have tanked my company very early on. It could have tanked Stonemaier Games very, very early on. Fortunately, I had a very important discussion with someone who was involved in the company that I was working full-time for at the time, and he brought up the idea of using fulfillment centers around the world. So I mention this because this was, like, it's so commonplace now if you're familiar with Kickstarter. This was not a thing back then. Creators were not doing this. And what ended up happening is that I obviously did that. I used the system where I plugged into different fulfillment centers around the world. I shipped our games, shipped Viticulture, freight. This was jumping forward a little bit to 2013, but I freight shipped Viticulture to those fulfillment centers, and they dispatched the games to backers in those regions. This is also known as like European friendly shipping now, Canadian friendly shipping. If you ever see those little, I'm a little proud of this, I have to say, because if you ever see those icons, like European friendly, Canadian friendly, if you see those on a Kickstarter project, those were created by Stonemaier Games. Like, that was our thing. We kind of invented this idea of worldwide fulfillment from these different fulfillment centers. I don't want to take complete credit for it. I'm sure someone else did it before us, but we were the ones to really promote the idea and to write about it. I wrote a very detailed blog post about how we did that, and many creators have adapted it. So if anything, I'm pretty proud of that legacy, that I found a better way to reach people worldwide, and I love that other creators have adapted that and found other ways. Companies have sprung up around that idea. Entire companies exist because of that concept that we helped to spread early on in the inception of my company. I mentioned my blog there. So there's this Kickstarter Lessons blog that I write. Now it's not just about Kickstarter and crowdfunding. It's also about entrepreneurship and working for yourself, things like that, leadership. But that was something that I started very early on, or very late in 2012, after the Viticulture Kickstarter funded, because I wanted to share my mistakes and insights and everything I had learned from the campaign. I wanted an outlet to share that and to engage with other creators, because nothing like that also really existed at the time. There wasn't as far as I was aware, especially not in the game space, a blog or website that was just about how to run a Kickstarter campaign. And I wanted that resource to be there for other creators so they wouldn't repeat the mistakes that I've run. And that's become kind of a big part of the Stonemaier identity and the brand. I write that blog 2 days a week. I've done so every week since late 2012. And I've learned a lot from the conversations I've had there, but I also love that that we could add a little value to the industry by having me write that blog and having guests also write entries from time to time as well. 2012 also was kind of the start of our ambassador program. I'm not sure if I called it that back then, but we have anyone can sign up to be a volunteer for Stonemaier Games, whether they're proofreading our games or playtesting our games or just moderating conversations about our games. Many different things that they can do if they just want to share their passion for my company, and we call them ambassadors. That program started unofficially in 2012 because I found that a lot of people through the Viticulture Kickstarter campaign wanted to be engaged on a deeper level and wanted to help out and give of their time and their talent. And I was really amazed by that. That's what made me really fall in love with the board game community and industry. And today that program has grown to around 1,600 people for Stonemaier Games. So that's just amazing. Like I don't know if we probably would exist in some form, but definitely not the way we are, the quality we are today. Those volunteers make a huge impact. Another thing that started back then was our e-newsletter. I'm mentioning some key points like this that relate to how my company has grown. The e-newsletter, I think, is a crucial part of any company's growth. It's how you bring people in and give them a way of learning important information about your company at the times that you need to tell them that important information. And I think the e-newsletter is still the best way to do that. Even with all the other forms of social media. And so our e-newsletter started with pretty much just our Kickstarter backers, so 942 backers, maybe less because it was an opt-in thing. You could just opt into the e-newsletter. Today it's grown to over 40,000 people. So a lot more people are engaged now than they were from those early days in 2012. Two more numbers. I'm not going to get too deep into numbers, but two other little numbers here. That first print run of Viticulture was 2,500 copies. So that was our first print run of any game. Now our total print runs of all of our games and expansions have crossed the 2 million threshold. We have 2 million products in print, and that's not even counting all the little stuff like promos and even accessories. That's just expansions and core games. 2 million from 2,500. And last, our revenue. I don't know if I wanted to go too deep into finances in this video, but our revenue that first year was the $65,000 that we raised on Kickstarter. And last year in 2018, our revenue was close to 10 million. It was 9.6 million. So I'm kind of, if you would ask me back then when we successfully funded Viticulture, if we would ever be a company that could earn even $1 million in 1 year, much less 10 million, I would have been highly doubtful that was possible. And so I'm kind of amazed that we've had that type of growth. All right, that's a lot for 2012. And 2013 was also a pretty big year. 2013 was when we launched our second Kickstarter for EUPHORIA. One other quick thing about EUPHORIA, I know our funds were so wrapped up in viticulture, we were fulfilling viticulture at the time, and really all of the money earned from viticulture went into making and distributing and fulfilling viticulture. We did have some extra copies that we sold to distributors. That was very helpful, but we basically ran out of money, and I had to take a loan, or I decided to take a loan against my 401k to fund the art and some other things for EUPHORIA. So that was very tight. So even after we had that $65,000 from viticulture, it was still very, very tight to make EUPHORIA happen. Fortunately, the EUPHORIA Kickstarter, oh, I should show you these games. I'm sorry. I forgot to show you Viticulture. This is the first edition of Viticulture here. Then I'm talking about EUPHORIA now. Here's the latest box of EUPHORIA. It was a little different back then, but pretty close. EUPHORIA went on Kickstarter and raised over $300,000, which again absolutely amazed me. Like that was a huge jump from Viticulture 65 to EUPHORIA's $300,000. It was neat to see that people were starting to trust my company as a result of what we did with viticulture. We delivered it on time. We delivered a product that needed some work still, as I will talk about in a minute, but was largely well received. And so it was neat to see EUPHORIA take off. I was still working full time at that time, but soon after EUPHORIA, I kind of realized that I was working 2 full-time jobs. I needed to have a little bit of give and take, but I didn't want to take on the risk of just going full-time for Stonemaier. That was a lot of risk at the time, and I didn't think of that $300 as money in the bank because I had to actually spend a ton of it to make EUPHORIA and spend even more of it to pay for fulfillment for EUPHORIA later in 2013. So I asked my boss basically if I could take off 1 day a week, take off Wednesday to focus just on Stonemaier Games and have that my company pay me, my employer pay me 20% less. So he was pretty happy about that because he got to pay me less and get essentially the same work out of me just over 2 days instead of 5 days, or over 4 days instead of 5 days. We also at the time, actually in the summer, we went to our first Gen Con, and I also did some brief private consultation. So I started thinking, okay, what's another revenue stream? I can start to give people advice about their Kickstarter projects, one-on-one, individually, privately. And I pretty quickly realized that I couldn't add that other thing. I couldn't focus on other people's companies in that way, in such a private one-on-one way, when I needed to focus a lot of my time and energy on running Stonemaier Games. And meanwhile, I was also writing this twice weekly blog about how to run a Kickstarter campaign. And so I thought, so I kind of started to draw a hard line that if anyone ever wanted advice from me or feedback or just wanted to ask a question or share their insights, that I would push them towards the comments of my blog, and we would have those conversations there so that they were public. They could help other people too. Other people could join in that conversation. And I stopped doing private consultations pretty much at the end of that summer. This was also around the time that we started to take on or bring in some localization partners. And this was a key part of the reason why I eventually, at the end of 2013, decided to go full-time, because not only were we did we have some money left over after the EUPHORIA Kickstarter, but we also had localization partners around the world, a few of them, one in Brazil and one in France, I believe at the time. Those were the two. Who wanted to make our games and bring them to other gamers worldwide. So that was really encouraging to me that we suddenly had this other revenue stream that we could start to count on. And then also in 2013 was our first charity auction. This has become an annual tradition, usually in October, November of each year. And basically, Alan and I felt very grateful that our company had grown, that people had come back to support us for EUPHORIA in such a large number after viticulture. We were feeling good, and we thought, we want to share this with other people. We want to take this good thing that we've been very fortunate to stumble into and do something good to help other people too. And so the idea behind the charity auction was that I selected, I believe, around 10 bloggers and content creators in the game industry that I really, really loved and that I wanted to share with others. And I asked them to each pick a charity of their choice. And then we contributed a special copy of EUPHORIA to those 10 auctions, essentially, for those different charities. People could place bids for the games, and all the money would go to the auction, to the charity selected by those bloggers. It was a wonderful thing. It was pretty small at that point, but it's grown from year to year. We've done it in different ways every year. Last year we had a pretty big money match. Like we doubled all the money that came in. And in total, since 2013, we've donated over $40,000 to charity as the result of that auction. Some of it, other people's money who are donating to games that we're giving away, like very nice editions of games that we're giving away. And then a decent amount of it, our own money that we're just matching those bids with. So that's something that I'm pretty proud of that we've done, that we started to do in 2013. As I said, at the end of 2013, I went full-time for Stonemaier Games, with the idea being that I basically had enough money in the bank to give it a try for 1 year And if it really didn't work out, then I'd find another normal job elsewhere and continue to maybe work on Stonemaier Games as a hobby. Otherwise, I would stick with Stonemaier Games. And fortunately, in early 2014, I ran the Kickstarter for Tuscany, the first expansion that we had released, and a pretty big expansion for viticulture. And it did very well in Kickstarter. It raised over $450,000 in Kickstarter. So that gave me some confidence that I was on the right path to stay full-time with Stonemaier Games. I realize that this is a video that's somewhat about me, just about as much about me as it is the company. Perhaps that's a turnoff for you. I totally understand if it is. Another side of it is that I've committed basically my life to this company over the last 7 years, since 2012, starting in 2011. It's a huge part of it. I'm kind of the face of the company. I'm still our only full-time employee. And so, and I typically work around 70 to 80 hours a week on this company. So I'm a big part of it. My story is very intertwined with the company's story. So Tuscany Kickstarter went really well. Also around that time, early in 2014, I realized that I didn't want to do exclusive content anymore, Kickstarter exclusives. This was something that we did on EUPHORIA, where we had a few exclusives on there. And I realized in 2014 that I didn't like having to tell people, no, you can't buy this, even though I have some of this in stock. I can't sell this to you because I made this commitment. I like the commitment. I respect the commitment. And I respect creators who respect that commitment. But it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right to say that we made this cool thing, notably for EUPHORIA, it was these nice gold bars. We made this cool thing. We have extras, but we can't sell it to you because we said we're going to be exclusive with it. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel right. And that's when I started to really realize what my company was about, what Stonemaier Games was about. And part of that was being inclusive to all types of people, and people who discover our games during the Kickstarter or for the first print run, and people who discover our games 5 years later, 10 years later. Being inclusive to all those different types of people became really, really important to me and Alan and our company's philosophy. And that happened in early 2014. And that's when we decided that we would make new special components, not the ones that we had in EUPHORIA, but new versions of them with sculptor Scott Wadico, who happens to live here in St. Louis. And that eventually became what we called our Stonemaier Games treasure chest, which is a special collection of unique resources. This ended up becoming a pretty neat line of products for our companies, accessory for our companies, that was used for our games and a variety of other games. That Kickstarter happened later in the year. I think it raised around $180,000, if I have that right, somewhere around there. 2014 was also the year that I started this YouTube channel. I think the channel existed before then, but I didn't really use it for much. And I realized that I didn't have an outlet to talk about game design or talk about the games that I was playing in a formal basis. And I really like talking about game design and what I love about games. I didn't want to be a reviewer because I'm so entrenched in the industry. These other designers are my peers. I don't want to critique them. Rather, I just wanted to share stuff that I loved. And so the focus of my entire channel is my favorite game mechanism in pretty much every game that I play. And so I've really enjoyed doing that. I don't know the subscriber count that it was back then. Now I think it's around, 15,000, 16,000. Back then I'm sure it was around 50 or 100 people. It was hardly anything. So if you do start a channel like that, keep in mind that the growth takes a long time. And that was, I'm glad that I didn't really have any growth in mind. I was like, I just want to do this for myself and start conversations about it and see where that goes. What else happened in 2014? 2014, this was a big one. At Gen Con in 2014, we signed our first game that wasn't designed by me, which is a big step. Stonemaier Games up to that point was a little bit of a vanity publisher, in that, like a self-publisher, we were essentially publishing my own games at our company. And so it was a big step to say, okay, we want to publish other people's games too, if they fit into our design philosophy and if we think we can make them beautiful and special and unique. And so that game became Between Two Cities, designed by Ben Rossett and Matthew O'Malley. That was discovered at an impromptu meeting at Gen Con 2014. We also opened around that time, I can't remember if it was right before or right after, we did open a submission process where anyone could submit their games to us. And we've had some great games come out of that I'll mention in a minute. Couple big things. 2014 was a big year. So a few other things is that we started working with Greater Than Games here in St. Louis as eventually what would become the company that we warehouse our games with, our distribution broker, which means they handle all the transactions and most of the engagement between, in regarding our games between themselves and distributors. Because we weren't just selling games directly to people through Kickstarter. We were starting to really get into wide distribution, worldwide distribution, and sell our games to distributors who would then sell to retailers. So that was through Greater Than Games. I also wrote my first viral blog post, which was called An Open Letter to Game Conventions from a Tiny Game Publisher, something to that effect. And it focused on the play and win system that some conventions used then. Really, I think Geekway was the main one, Geekway to the West here in St. Louis. But after I wrote that letter, to perhaps the ire of many other publishing companies, but I think it's a great thing, many other conventions started to adapt this play and win model where basically you go to the convention, you play a bunch of games. Every time you play a game in the play and win section, you write down your name, and at the end of the convention, they draw names out of a hat for each game that you played, and you might win one of those games just for having played it. So I think it's a wonderful marketing tactic where you're giving people a reason to actually play those games right then and there at the convention. And the convention brings in more people. It's good for the convention, it's good for the publisher, it's good for the consumer. Play and win. That came from that open letter. It wasn't my idea. It was Geekway's idea originally that I helped to spread, and I'm happy to see that spread. We also started to send a lot of games to reviewers. We had done that for Kickstarter, but we hadn't started to do that much after Kickstarter until 2014, 2015 a little bit, and now it's a huge part of our marketing strategy to send a lot of games and products to reviewers. We also hosted our first design day in 2014. This was an event where we, in September, we had a bunch of people, a bunch of designers and just people who loved games gather at a facility that eventually became, we eventually moved it to a place called Pieces Board Game Cafe and Bar here in St. Louis. A wonderful place if you want to go to a board game cafe. But we had a different location originally. And basically it was a place where people could come and play test their games and get feedback from other people about their games. So it's not really a Stonemaier focused event, but it's a small event. It was inspired partially by Richard Bliss of Funding the Dream. Just another way to kind of give back, but also strategically a way for us to scout out a bunch of games at one time, because a lot of people bring their games with the hopes that someone will publish them. So we get to scout out a bunch of games at that time, even though people aren't necessarily pitching to Stonemaier Games through this event. At the very end of 2014, I don't know if you remember this, if you're around, but that's when I teased the box image for Scythe. So I've been working on Scythe with Jakob Rozalski for a few months at that point. We had the box image. We teased it in December on Board Game Geek, and within a few days, it was either the most liked or the second most liked image of the entire year on Board Game Geek. It really connected with people. So we kind of had an idea that something big was going to happen with Scythe if I could get the game right. Sorry, I'm getting a bunch of text here. I'm doing this video live without editing, so I got to keep on going. So that was end of 2014. That leads into 2015, which was a massive year for our company. 2015 started with the Between Two Cities Kickstarter, which I already mentioned. Between Two Cities. This is the game that we signed at Gen Con. We had the Kickstarter for it. Did very well, raised over $220,000. Later in the year, we did another Treasure Chest Kickstarter. This was Treasure Chest 2 through 4. I don't have it on my pile here, but it was a Kickstarter for 3 new Treasure Chests. This time, the tokens were greatly enhanced. Actually, this was when we started working with Scott. Before Panda had done the sculpts, this is when Scott Wadiko came in and started doing the sculpts and took it to a whole new level. Scott is an amazing modeler. So we had these beautiful Treasure Chest tokens that were for a wide variety of games, definitely not just for Stonemaier Games at that point. Morten Monrad Peterson is a guy that started volunteering for Stonemaier Games back during the viticulture campaign, and he had made the Automa system for Tuscany, for viticulture in Tuscany, which is an intelligent solo system for board games that he applied to the viticulture in Tuscany. Morton is now pretty famous for his work in the solo world. Back then, it was just a hobby for him. And I mentioned this in 2015 because we hired him part-time as a developer for our company. Morton does a lot of different things now for us, but he's still kind of unofficially a developer. I don't know if that's really the focus of his work, but that's part of what he does. But that was kind of a big deal for us because that was our first outside hire. And actually, I did skip over one thing. I mentioned that Alan and I didn't pay ourselves for a long time. We started to pay ourselves a little bit in late 2013. So we went about 18 months without paying ourselves anything. I mentioned that because if you are thinking about starting a company and you want to be inspired by Stonemaier Games, don't pay yourself for 18 months. Or do. I don't care. But it wasn't a priority to us to get paid. We were doing it for fun and for love for quite some time. So we hired Morton part-time. Morton's over in Denmark. I've only met Morton, I believe, once, maybe twice. 2015 was also when my Kickstarter book, my crowdfunding book, A Crowdfunder's Strategy Guide, was released. This was something that came about the previous year where a literary agent had approached me with a pitch for me to write a book about Kickstarter. I did a lot of research into other companies, did a lot of interviews, took some content from my blog, incorporated it into a book, and it was published by a wonderful company called Barrett Kohler and released in late 2015. This was also in late 2015, or like mid to late 2015, when, again, I don't have it on my stack of games here, but this is when I released Viticulture Essential Edition. So this was a pretty important stepping stone in my company because up until this point, Viticulture had actually gone through two different editions. It had gone through Viticulture First Edition, Viticulture Second Edition, and then Viticulture Essential Edition. And as proud as I am of Viticulture Essential, I really like how Viticulture Essential worked out. It was a tough thing to do because in some ways I feel like if you put out multiple editions, you're kind of admitting to the world that you didn't do the best job in the first edition, which we didn't. I had a lot to learn from that first edition of Viticulture. But I also think it takes courage to do that. I'm not just saying that about me, I'm saying that about every publisher, designer out there who has the courage to say, I can do better. I can do a better version of this. I can make it the art and the graphic design better. I can make the mechanism stronger, the theme stronger, things like that. And so, but it was kind of a time for me to say, I want to get our games right the first time from now on. We still make plenty of mistakes with our games. Not big mistakes like I did with comparing Viticulture First Edition to Essential Edition, but still mistakes. But that was the last game that we did have multiple different editions for, and really the only game that we have multiple editions for so far in that way. The big thing, the big ending for 2015 was the SCYTHE Kickstarter. This was definitely the biggest Kickstarter that I've ever run. At the time, it was one of the biggest that had ever been run in the board game industry. I think it was the biggest strategy game Kickstarter ever. At the time, it raised about $1.8 million. And it would end up, as I will talk about in a minute, being our last Kickstarter. And so that brought my Kickstarter tally to around 3.2 million, which is both a lot of money and compared to some massive Kickstarters today, less than a single Kickstarter can raise. But at the time, it was a lot of money to walk away saying, hey, I've run 7 tabletop game Kickstarter projects and raised 3.2 million. It was pretty cool. But SCYTHE brought a huge amount of visibility to my company, both during the Kickstarter and also jumping forward to 2016 when some stuff happened that I'll mention in a minute. But before I get to that, 2016 was when we started our Facebook groups, which has become like a huge part of the community aspect of my company. We have groups for each of our different games. Now, let me show you SCYTHE here. Here's the SCYTHE. Oh man, it's heavy. This is the SCYTHE Kickstarter edition, one of the Kickstarter editions of SCYTHE. I've got too much stuff in that box. That's not even the legendary box. So that was SCYTHE. We started to form these Facebook groups. I think the first one was for either SCYTHE or Viticulture. It wasn't even started by me, but I started to catch on to the idea. I really liked the idea of these communities forming around specific games, not just on the Stonemaier Games Facebook page. And that's become a really neat way to see people engage with the exact game that they're passionate about. We released more visitors, an expansion for Viticulture, and what else do we do? And the Token Trilogy. I ran a Kickstarter campaign for the last set of realistic resources, another trilogy of realistic resource boxes, bringing that total to 7 different collections of realistic resources. They just got better and better and prettier every time we did it, thanks to Scott and thanks to Panda. This was the time that we fulfilled Scythe. So we're getting to the spring of 2016. We fulfilled Scythe between 0 and 2 months early for backers around the world. And I won't get into everything that happened during this time because it was largely very good. Like, we were fulfilling early. The game was extremely well received from the start. But it was like for me, emotionally one of the darkest times at my company, because it was a lot. It was a lot more than I thought it would be, and it led to us deciding soon after that we weren't going to do Kickstarter anymore. So Scythe, while that wasn't necessarily the plan, we looked back at Scythe and said, okay, that's going to be the last Kickstarter that we do. So that was 2015. Right now I'm filming this in 2019. We're coming up on 4 years without using Kickstarter. And it's been neat to see the growth of my company since then. But it was also crucially important for those first few years for us to be on Kickstarter, to have that growth and learn a lot about customer service and community and all the other things that you learn from running a Kickstarter campaign. So a couple other things in 2016. One is that I did a pre-order and made a Tuscany Essential, which became a more slimmed down version of Tuscany, the expansion of viticulture. We also put out late in the year, I believe, the first expansion for Scythe, an expansion called Invaders from Afar. And we started to work with MeepleSource. We started to have a few really important partnerships at this time. One with MeepleSource to sell promos for our games, and one with Top Shelf Gamer to sell our realistic resource tokens outside of the original boxes that they came in, because the boxes themselves are really, really expensive. Not the cardboard itself, but just putting all the tokens together in one box. But we wanted to continue to sell those tokens to people who wanted them, so we had this partnership with Top Shelf Gamer. And we also had our first investor in 2016, if I have that date right. It was either 2016 or 2017. We had someone who was interested in investing in our company. Alan wanted to sell some of his shares, and so it worked out well for both of them to collaborate in that way and have a little bit of exchange of money and shares in Stonemaier Games. At the time, and still, I own 90% of the company, and a few other people own the other 10%. 2017 is actually kind of a lighter year, a little bit more streamlined here than some of those busier early years. In 2017, in fact, it was just 2017 because 2018 gets busy again. In 2017, we had an expansion for Between Two Cities called Capitals. I put out 2 new Scythe products, one called the Legendary Box, which was a weird one to put out, but it's basically an empty box just to hold a bunch of Scythe stuff. This was something that was almost purely fan demanded, basically. Fans wanted it, and so I was like, all right, you want an empty box? I'll make you an empty box. I'll try to make it as good as I can. And the other fan thing to come out of this, and which has become a pretty big part of my company, is fans coming to me with expansions that they've created and play tested, and I see something in them, and I work with that designer to make something happen. And that was the Win Gambit for an expansion to Scythe. A guy named Kai Stark over in Germany created this expansion, came to me. I ended up working a ton on it with Kai and really refining it, turning it into something new, but also retained some core original ideas from his original concept. And since then we've done that with several other products as well, where I've collaborated with someone else who came to me with an idea, or I came to them with an idea. That started with the Win Gambit. And all during this time, I was working on a legacy game, one of my favorite genres of games, that came out late in 2017, and that would be Charterstone. Now, all throughout 2017, except for the Legendary Box, everything that we were doing, we were selling just to distributors, and distributors were selling to retailers. We were doing very, very little sales on our website. There were no pre-orders. We were just making something, sometimes raising funds from distributors, but largely just committing our money to something and making it and selling it to distributors and retailers, which was a good strategy at the time. It's evolved a little bit since then, but that was what happened in 2017. and it ended the year with Charterstone. Taking a drink here because 2018 was a big year for us. A lot of stuff happening, a lot of social media stuff in 2018. This was the year that I joined Instagram for the first time. I ended up using my own Instagram account. Maybe I should have created one for Stonemaier Games, but now it's kind of just the Stonemaier Games Instagram account. It's under my name. And I post every day on it. I post something related to games, sometimes my cats, sometimes Stonemaier Games. This is also when I started doing Facebook Live. I do these weekly Facebook Live chats every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central Time, where I get on Facebook Live and just talk about some random stuff, some Stonemaier news. I answer questions for about an hour. So it's kind of like an hour-long Stonemaier TV show. This was the year 2018 that I started doing these Sunday sit-down videos, where every Sunday, in addition to the 2 game design videos that I was doing on YouTube, I would sit down on Sunday and talk more in depth about a topic. It started with a video about Red Rising, and then it's become, a lot of them are like top 10 videos. I talk about top 10 things, and I talk about game mechanisms in those top 10 games in a certain category. I was surprised to see that people wanted, like my game design videos are about 5 minutes. My Sunday sit-down videos range from like 15 to 30 minutes. And I was really surprised to see that those are the videos that really brought people in and made people engage. People like the game design videos, but the channel really started to take off when I had those longer form videos, which I still don't quite understand, but I'm happy to keep making them and I enjoy making them. This was also the year that we started, we started sponsoring a channel called The Mill. This was late in 2018. A fan of Stonemaier Games, an ambassador named Dusty Crane. I talked with him about the idea or he talked to me, it was a mutual exchange of creating a channel where a non-Stonemaier person, but someone who cares about Stonemaier Games, is passionate about it, creates a channel about Stonemaier Games content for fans to access it and have a community around our content in a different way that wasn't coming from me. So that's The Mill. That's something that we sponsor to this day. Dusty does weekly videos on Saturday on The Mill. Also related to videos, we worked with Rodney from Watch It Played to put out rules replacement videos for our games. And we started adding deaf and hard of hearing transcripts to those videos. Actually, they're just transcripts, but they are for the deaf and hard of hearing. And that was something that I wanted to bring into this idea of inclusivity that's important to me and my company. We started doing that with Rodney, Rodney's videos. 2018 was also the first year that we had a digital version of our game, a full AI digital version of our game. This was SCYTHE, released to the world. I had been looking forward to this for a long time, trying it with different games. Finally, it happened with SCYTHE, and that has become SCYTHE Digital. 2018 was also when I started the Champion program, Stonemaier Champions. It started with a very small number of people who basically, the early idea, and still the idea today, was people could sign up to support the content that I create, the Kickstarter blog and my game design YouTube channel. They could sign up and pay a yearly fee of $12 to support that content. And also along the way, what that involved into is that those people would get perks like free or discounted shipping, and they would be first in line to have their games shipped when they bought from us. So it was kind of a way to let people, if they wanted to thank me and thank Stonemaier for the content that we create, but also a way to engage people who wanted to buy directly from us. Because as I mentioned, in 2017, people were only buying from retailers. And I started to hear from a lot of people that they wanted to buy from retailers, but some people wanted to have the choice to buy directly from the publisher. And I thought the Champion program would be a way to champion that idea. Started with just a few people. The Champion program has grown to over 3,700 people who are now members of that program. 2018 was also the first year that I implemented a total of, 5 times, this new pre-order system that I wanted to try out, which is basically that we make a new product, we let people pre-order it, and then we ship it to people very soon after that. So it's not like a pre-order where you're pre-ordering and waiting for 6 months. You're pre-ordering, and at this point, you're just waiting a few days. Early in 2018, you were waiting maybe a month and then getting the game. But I did that for My Little Scythe, which was another of our games that was not designed by me. My Little Scythe. designed by Hobie Chow and his daughter. We also did that for, I have another game here, but we did it for Scythe, The Rise of Fenris, the Metal Mechs for Scythe, Scythe Encounters, and Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This is another game from Ben Rossett and Matthew O'Malley. And this was actually the first time that we collaborated a little bit with another publishing company, Bezier Games, because Castles of Mad King Ludwig is one of my favorite games, and I figured, we're doing this castle-themed game. Some of the game's mechanisms in this game were very inspired by castles. Let's combine the two. Let's join forces a little bit. We're the publisher of it, but Bezier was very supportive in helping us bring this game to life. So we used the pre-order system for all those games. That brings us to late 2018 when I announced a new game called Wingspan. And Wingspan ended up being on pre-order in early 2019. And this has ended up being a pretty amazing product for us. It's designed by Elizabeth Hargrave. We had met with her at Gen Con a few years before that. And I helped Elizabeth quite a bit over the next few years develop this game and turn it into what Wingspan is today. But Wingspan, as I record this, Wingspan is still causing us troubles, but in a good way, in that we have had trouble keeping up with the demand for Wingspan. I didn't realize how big of a hit it would be as quickly as it was, because we did have the pre-order in January, but it wasn't released to retailers until a few months later, and we're still catching up on demand. We're getting there. Hopefully, if you're watching this video deep into the future, we have finally caught up on Wingspan demand, but in some ways, it's a good thing, even though I'm sorry for anyone out there who's pre-ordered it and doesn't have their copy yet. But it's been kind of a good thing for our company because we hadn't really had a huge hit. Charterstone sold very well. Some of these other games sold well, but we hadn't had a huge hit, a huge visible hit since Scythe, and Wingspan has been that resurgent hit for us. It's brought us a lot of attention. I think it's brought a lot of non-gamers into the hobby too, which is pretty cool. A lot of birders discovering games for the first time. So that's Wingspan. Wingspan later, actually very recently, later in the year, ended up winning one of the big German game awards called the Kennerspiel, which was the first time that any of our games has won an award of that level. And really, it doesn't get much higher than that other than the Spiel des Jahres, the slightly bigger award. There are many other awards and accolades that games receive and that our games have received, but that's definitely the biggest and most visible and most impactful that any of our games has received so far. In 2019, a few other things. We released the first expansion for EUPHORIA, the only expansion for EUPHORIA, called Ignorance is Bliss. I also released what I announced would be the last product for Scythe, the modular board. So Scythe has been a huge thing for our company. We plan to continue to support it and support the community around Scythe and continue to reprint it so people can discover it well into the future. But we've spent a lot of time in that world, and now we're ready to focus on new worlds. And in 2019, we also sold, I mentioned that we worked with Top Shelf Gamer to continue to sell these realistic resource tokens. And in 2019, we sold that IP to Top Shelf Gamer. So they had been kind of running the show for a while with these tokens and doing a wonderful job. And so when they came to us with an idea of selling the IP to them, it just seemed like the right thing to do. It was mutually beneficial, and it just seemed good to do because they had put so much time and energy and resources into keeping that line of products alive. So we sold that to Top Shelf Gamer. I want to end with our final game, or not our final game, but the most recent game. Before I get there, two other quick things about 2019. I am still our only full-time employee. I continue to work, and not quite 80 hours anymore. It's more like probably 60 or 70 hours at this point. But I am our only full-time employee. We still have Morten over in Denmark. Morten works usually around maybe 5 to 10 hours a week on Stonemaier Games stuff. We have Alan, who works about 5 hours a week. But everything else is outsourced, and I'm kind of the hub for that. I'm kind of the project manager for all the many different people out there, all the independent contractors, the manufacturers, the shipping companies that make my company exist, make Stonemaier Games exist. But I am our only full-time employee. So we've grown so much, but we're still very, very small in terms of personnel. We now have 3 games in the top 40 of Board Game Geek, at least as of the filming of this on August in August of 2019. So we have SCYTHE in the top 10. We have Viticulture somewhere around 20, and then Wingspan just became the number 40 game on Board Game Geek. And that's out of 8 total games that have been released. And that brings us to our latest game, which I just announced yesterday. This is Tapestry. So this is a civilization game. This is the first game that I designed for release since Charterstone. This is a civilization game that's epic in scope. It ranges from the beginning of time towards into the future, really. And it doesn't follow real-world history. This is an opportunity for players to create their own history and their own world, really. That's grounded somewhat in reality, but there aren't historical figures, there aren't historical moments that you're trying to capture. You are creating your own historical moments when you play Tapestry. So this is our 9th product, our 9th game, our 9th brand that we're putting out. So that's 9 games over 8 years. And I mention that because that, again, is a pretty crucially important part of our company, that we try to focus on quality over quantity. We are small, we are big in some ways, but we're also very small in terms of personnel and the number of games that we release. And I like to keep that focused. I like to keep that focus, and I intend to continue to do that in the future, because I want to put, when I release a new game, when I work on a game, whether I'm the designer or the developer or the publisher of that game, I want to put everything I have into that game and to make that game as good as possible and to help people engage with that game for a long time, not just when the game comes out, but for a long time. And so that's one of the reasons that we kind of take this slow approach, this days of wonder approach of releasing 1, maybe 2 games a year, and really putting a ton of time and energy and resources into those games. I hope to continue to do that in the future. So that, my friends, is a brief history, maybe not so brief, this is the longest video that I filmed for this channel, but a somewhat brief history of Stonemaier Games. Hopefully you've learned something about my company. If you have any questions or you want to highlight any big things that I missed, you're welcome to do so in the comments. Or if you have anything that you'd like to add from your perspective, as whether you're a consumer or a backer or a lover or a hater, another creator, another publisher, another designer, I'd love to hear anything that you want to share in the comments below. And I look forward to continuing this journey with you well into the future. Again, I'm Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and I look forward to talking with you in the comments. Thanks.